December 7, 1941, above Pearl Harbor. Commander Mitsuo Fuchida circled his Nakajima B 5N2 torpedo bomber over the burning American battleships, surveying the devastation below through smoke that rose thousands of feet into the tropical morning sky. The acrid smell of burning oil penetrated even his closed cockpit. Below, the harbor resembled a vision of industrial apocalypse. American warships transformed into funeral pyres of twisted steel and exploding ammunition. Through the billowing black columns that marked the death throes of Arizona, Oklahoma, and West Virginia, Fuchida's gaze returned repeatedly to Ford Island's carrier berths. Empty. All of them empty. The prize targets, the flattoops that Japanese naval planning had deemed America's most dangerous weapons, were absent from the anchorage that intelligence reports had assured would contain at least 2, possibly 3 carriers on this Sunday morning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Enterprise was somewhere at sea, returning from Wake Island. Lexington had departed days earlier for Midway. Saratoga was in California undergoing maintenance. The whereabouts of these ships represented the single significant flaw in an otherwise devastatingly successful surprise attack. Yet as Fuchida transmitted his famous signal, Tora, 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 confirming tactical surprise had been achieved, he felt profound confidence in Japanese naval superiority despite the missing American carriers. The arithmetic seemed decisive. His nation possessed 10 aircraft carriers, a fleet carefully built over 2 decades of naval expansion. American intelligence suggested the United States Navy operated only 7 carriers in the entire Pacific Fleet. Even if all 7 survived today's attack, Japan's numerical advantage was substantial. More importantly, Japanese naval aviation had proven itself superior in training, experience, and tactical doctrine during 4 years of combat operations in China. The pilots circling with Fuchida represented the finest naval aviators in the world. They had trained for this mission with fanatical dedication, practicing shallow water torpedo attacks until the technique became instinctive. Their success today demonstrated Japanese tactical brilliance. 8 American battleships sunk or damaged in less than 2 hours. Nearly 200 American aircraft destroyed, most on the ground. Japanese losses were minimal, fewer than 30 aircraft from a strike force of 353 planes. What Fuchida could not see from his circling bomber, what no amount of tactical brilliance could reveal, was that he was witnessing not Japanese naval supremacy, but its expiration date. Those missing carriers would return. And in 6 months, at a tiny atoll called Midway, the naval arithmetic would be recalculated in American favor through a mathematics written in burning Japanese carriers and shattered assumptions about inevitable victory. The mathematics seemed favorable. Japan's Kido Butai, the powerful carrier strike force that had just crippled the Pacific Fleet, represented the most formidable naval aviation capability ever assembled. 6 fleet carriers had launched the Pearl Harbor strike, more than America had in the entire Pacific. The confidence radiating from Japanese naval headquarters seemed justified by both numbers and demonstrated capability. 3 years later, Lieutenant Commander Zenji Abe would stand on the deck of the light carrier Chitose as American aircraft swarmed from every direction during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Through the chaos of anti-aircraft fire and diving bombers, he counted the enemy task groups on the horizon. 14 separate carrier task groups, each containing multiple flattoops, launching endless waves of Hellcats, Avengers, and Dauntlesses. Sight contradicted everything Japanese naval intelligence had predicted, every calculation that had justified the war's beginning. Where Japan had expected parity or slight disadvantage, they faced an armada that seemed impossible. "They have more carriers than we have destroyers," Abe would later recall thinking as his ship shuddered under bomb hits. "How is this possible? We were told America had 7 carriers in 1941. Now they have 100. This was not hyperbole. By October 1944, the United States Navy had commissioned over 100 aircraft carriers of various classes. Japan, which began the war with numerical advantage, now operated fewer than 10. The shock of this reversal, the inability to comprehend American industrial capacity, would haunt Japanese naval aviators from midway to the Philippine Sea to Leyte Gulf. Their stunned realization that they had challenged not just a navy but an industrial colossus represented one of the great miscalculations in military history. The Imperial Japanese Navy that struck Pearl Harbor had earned its confidence through decades of careful preparation and stunning recent victories. Since 1937, Japanese naval aviation had dominated Chinese skies. The aircraft carriers Kaga and Ryujo had supported operations in China, providing Japanese planners with operational experience no other navy possessed. By December 1941, Japan operated a carrier force unmatched in experience, training, and tactical sophistication. The Kido Butai, assembled for the Pearl Harbor operation, included 6 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, Hiryu, Shokaku, and Zuikaku. These ships carried over 400 aircraft operated by pilots averaging 600 flight hours with extensive combat experience. Vice Admiral Chuchi Nagumo commanded this force with confidence born of superiority. Japanese intelligence estimated American carrier strength at 7 ships: Lexington, Saratoga, Ranger, Yorktown, Enterprise, Wasp, and Hornet. The mathematics seemed manageable. Japan possessed 10 carriers, including light carriers. The United States had 7. With Japanese pilots superior in training and experience, with Japanese torpedo technology more advanced, with Japanese operational doctrine refined through years of preparation, victory seemed achievable. The strategy was simple: destroy American carrier strength in a decisive battle, establish a defensive perimeter, then negotiate peace from a position of strength. American industrial capacity was acknowledged but dismissed as requiring years to mobilize effectively. Captain Minoru Genda, principal planner of the Pearl Harbor attack, addressed his pilots before the operation with absolute confidence. "We face 7 American carriers. Our 6 ships launching today represent concentrated striking power they cannot match. After we eliminate their carriers at Pearl Harbor or in subsequent battles, they will require 2 to 3 years to rebuild their strength. By then, our defensive perimeter will be impregnable." This calculation would prove catastrophically wrong, but in December 1941, it seemed entirely reasonable. Japanese planners based their estimates on historical precedent. Building a fleet carrier required 3 to 4 years from keel laying to commissioning. Destroyer escort numbers suggested limited American shipbuilding capacity. Even accounting for American industrial strength, Japanese naval intelligence calculated the United States might commission 10 to 12 new carriers by 1944. The reality would exceed their most pessimistic projections by an order of magnitude. The early months of 1942 seemed to confirm Japanese calculations. The carriers Shokaku and Zuikaku supported the invasion of Rabaul. The Kido Butai ranged freely across the Indian Ocean, sinking the British carrier Hermes and forcing the Royal Navy to abandon eastern waters. Japanese carriers supported operations in the Philippines, the Dutch East Indies, and throughout the Southwest Pacific. American carrier strength appeared exactly as predicted. Lexington and Yorktown operated in the Coral Sea. Enterprise and Hornet launched the Doolittle raid. Saratoga underwent repairs after torpedo damage. Wasp operated in the Atlantic. 7 carriers, as intelligence had predicted. The numbers matched expectations. Then came the Battle of the Coral Sea, in May 1942. For the first time, Japanese carriers failed to achieve their objective. The light carrier Shoho was sunk. The fleet carrier Shokaku suffered severe damage requiring months of repairs. Most critically, Japanese pilots began reporting something unexpected. The American pilots they faced were improving rapidly. Task Force 17, built around Lexington and Yorktown, fought the Japanese carrier force to a tactical draw. Captain Takahisa Amagai, air officer aboard Zuikaku, noted something disturbing in post-battle analysis. The American pilots showed marked improvement over those encountered in February and March. Their tactics were better coordinated. Their aircraft performed adequately at altitude. Most concerning, they demonstrated no shortage of replacement pilots or aircraft. When we damaged Yorktown, they quickly brought forward another carrier group. Their ability to concentrate forces rivals our own. This observation, buried in routine after-action reports, hinted at something Japanese planning had not fully considered. American forces were not just fighting, they were learning. And behind them stood industrial capacity just beginning to mobilize. 1 month later came Midway. The battle would enter history as Japan's first decisive defeat, but for our purposes, its significance lies in what Japanese survivors reported about American carrier strength. Japanese reconnaissance expected to find 2, possibly 3 American carriers defending Midway. Instead, Nagumo's scout planes reported 3 carrier groups, and evidence suggested more American flattoops might be operating nearby. Yorktown, supposedly crippled at Coral Sea, had returned to battle after 72 hours of emergency repairs at Pearl Harbor. This impossible feat of damage control represented American industrial efficiency Japanese planners had not anticipated. Enterprise and Hornet operated as expected, but where were the other American carriers? How had Yorktown returned to service so quickly? Lieutenant Yoichi Tomonaga, leading the second wave against Midway, radioed back. Enemy carrier strength exceeds intelligence estimates. Recommend caution. Hours later, he would die leading a torpedo attack against American carriers that Japanese planning had assured him would not be present in such numbers. After Midway, Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Half the Pearl Harbor striking force destroyed in 1 day. American losses: 1 fleet, carrier, Yorktown. The arithmetic that had seemed favorable 6 months earlier was shifting, but Japanese planners still believed they could manage the situation. America had 6 carriers remaining. Japan had 6 fleet carriers plus several light carriers. Numerical parity remained achievable. What Japanese intelligence failed to grasp was the industrial mobilization already underway in American shipyards. The carriers that would shock Japanese pilots into disbelief were already on building ways, their construction proceeding at a pace Japan could never match. In June 1942, as Japanese forces reeled from Midway, the keel of USS Essex was already laid down at Newport News shipbuilding. She was the first of a class that would revolutionize naval warfare through mass production. The Essex-class program represented American industrial warfare at its most devastating. Standardized design, modular construction, multiple shipyards operating simultaneously, and construction, times compressed from 4 years to 18 months. Japanese naval intelligence learned of the Essex-class program, but fundamentally misunderstood its implications. Traditional naval construction suggested America might complete 6 to 8 of these carriers by 1945. The reality was that American shipyards had been designed from the beginning for mass production. Naval architects had created a carrier design optimized for rapid construction. Standardized components meant sub-assemblies could be manufactured across the country, then shipped to assembly yards. Welding techniques replaced riveting, cutting construction time dramatically. By the end of 1942, 7 Essex-class carriers were under construction simultaneously. Japanese intelligence, still recovering from Midway, estimated American carrier strength at 6 operational flattoops, with perhaps 8 to 10 new carriers expected by 1945. The actual figure would be 32, Essex-class carriers laid down before war's end, with 17 completing in time for combat operations. But the Essex-class represented only part of America's response. In January 1943, the first Independence-class light carrier was commissioned. These ships, converted from Cleveland-class light cruiser hulls, could be completed in 15 months. They carried fewer aircraft than fleet carriers, but could be built quickly and in large numbers. 9 Independence-class carriers would join the fleet, providing fast carrier task groups with additional flexibility Japanese planners had never anticipated. Commander Tameichi Hara, one of Japan's most experienced destroyer captains, encountered the new American carrier groups in November 1943 during operations off Rabaul. His report captured the shock Japanese forces experienced as American strength multiplied beyond comprehension. We identified 6 separate carrier groups operating in the Solomons area. Each group contains multiple carriers. Intelligence suggested America possessed 8 to 10 carriers total. We are facing 30 or more ships. Where are they coming from? How is this possible? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The answer lay in American shipyards, operating 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, employing hundreds of thousands of workers in a coordinated industrial effort beyond Japanese capability to match or even fully comprehend. Newport News Shipbuilding, Bethlehem Steel Quincy, New York Naval Shipyard, Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Fall River Shipyard, and others worked simultaneously on multiple carriers. Components manufactured in Pennsylvania were installed on ships in Virginia. Engines built in Connecticut powered carriers assembled in Massachusetts. This distributed, coordinated manufacturing represented industrial organization Japan had never developed. Japanese shipyards operated traditionally, with each major warship essentially hand-built by specialized teams. Construction times improved marginally through experience, but fundamental limitations in manufacturing capacity, materials, and trained workers made rapid expansion impossible. By mid-1943, the mathematical reality facing Japanese naval aviation had become nightmarish. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot by American pilots, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa commanded the first mobile fleet built around 9 aircraft carriers. His intelligence briefing indicated he might face 12 to 15 American carriers. The reality was 15 American carriers in the 5th Fleet alone, organized into 4 separate task groups, each operating independently yet capable of coordinating massive strikes. Task Group 58.1. Carriers Hornet, Yorktown, Belleau Wood, and Bataan. Task Group 58.2. Carriers Bunker Hill, Wasp, Monterey, and Cabot. Task Group 58.3. Carriers Enterprise, Lexington, Princeton, and San Jacinto. Task Group 58.4. Carriers Essex, Langley, and Cowpens. 15 carriers in one battle. Japan began the war with 10. Ozawa commanded 9. The Americans had deployed 15 against him, and Japanese intelligence reported more American carriers operating in the Southwest Pacific, supporting operations in the Atlantic, conducting training along the American coast, and undergoing repairs or refitting. Petty Officer First Class Sakai Yamamoto launched from Carrier Taiho that morning, leading a division of 6-0 fighters. His mission briefing had mentioned strong American carrier presence, expect tough opposition. Nothing prepared him for what he encountered. I counted aircraft in the sky like counting stars. Hundreds of American planes, all coming from different directions. We tried to form up for attack, but they were everywhere. Below us, I saw American carriers spread across the ocean. 6, 7, 8 ships, and those were just the ones visible from my position. Other divisions reported more carriers in different locations. It was impossible. We were told America had 12 carriers. I saw evidence of 20 or more that day. Yamamoto survived the battle. Most of his comrades did not. Japanese forces lost over 600 aircraft that day, most to American fighters launched from those impossible numbers of carriers. The psychological impact was devastating. Japanese pilots had trained to expect numerical disadvantage. They had developed tactics to fight outnumbered. But this wasn't disadvantage. It was annihilation. For every Japanese carrier launching aircraft, the Americans had 2. For every Japanese aircraft in the sky, 5 American planes dominated the airspace. After the Philippine Sea, surviving Japanese pilots began questioning everything they had been told about American industrial capacity. How many carriers did America actually possess? Intelligence briefings mentioned 20 to 30. Pilots who survived combat operations reported seeing 40 or more different hull numbers. Captured documents revealed plans for 70, 80, possibly 100 carriers. "We thought they were exaggerating," Lieutenant Zenji Abe later admitted. "We assumed captured documents represented American propaganda or wishful thinking. The idea that any nation could build 100 aircraft carriers seemed insane. Our entire nation, with its full industrial capacity, had built fewer than 20 carriers in total. How could America, fighting a two-ocean war, possibly build 5 times that number?" The industrial reality. The truth behind American carrier production revealed fundamental differences in industrial capacity that Japanese planners had catastrophically underestimated. In 1937, when Japan invaded China and began expanding its naval air arm, the United States possessed the world's largest industrial economy. American steel production exceeded Japan's by a factor of 12 to 1. American shipbuilding capacity, even in peacetime, surpassed all other nations. American petroleum refining provided 90% of global fuel production. These raw statistics, translated into naval construction capabilities, Japan could never match. Consider the Essex-class program alone. 32 carriers laid down between 1941 and 1945, 17 completed and commissioned during wartime, 13 more finished shortly after war's end. Each Essex-class carrier displaced 27,000 tons, carried 90 aircraft, and required approximately 25 million man-hours to complete. The labor force behind this production was equally staggering. Newport News Shipbuilding employed over 30,000 workers at peak production. Bethlehem, Steel Quincy had 25,000 employees. Across all American shipyards, hundreds of thousands of workers built carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and auxiliary vessels simultaneously. Women, who had been excluded from heavy industry before the war, comprised significant portions of the workforce. Rosie the Riveter was not propaganda but reality, representing hundreds of thousands of women performing skilled labor in shipyards nationwide. Japanese shipyards, conversely, employed traditional methods requiring extensive specialized training. The workforce remained predominantly male, with craftsmen training for years before achieving journeyman status. Expansion was difficult because training new workers took time Japan did not have. Material shortages, especially high-grade steel and specialized alloys, limited construction capacity, even when workers were available. Commander Shigeru Fukudome, chief of the operations section of the Naval General Staff, reviewed American production reports in mid-1944 with mounting horror. The figures seemed impossible, yet multiple intelligence sources confirmed them. In 1943 alone, American shipyards had launched 11 Essex-class fleet carriers and 8 Independence-class light carriers. 19 new carriers in 12 months. Japan had completed 3 carriers in that same period, and one of those, Taiho, would be sunk at the Philippine Sea before completing a year of service. "We are not fighting a nation," Fukudome told his staff. "We are fighting an industrial system we cannot comprehend. They build carriers faster than we can train pilots to face them. They replace losses in weeks that would take us years to restore. Every calculation we made about American industrial capacity was wrong by orders of magnitude." The escort carrier revolution. If the Essex and Independence classes shocked Japanese planners, the escort carrier program represented something beyond their ability to conceptualize. These small carriers, built on merchant ship hulls, could be completed in as little as 3 months using standardized Kaiser shipbuilding techniques perfected in Liberty ship production. They carried fewer aircraft, operated more slowly, and possessed limited capabilities compared to fleet carriers. But they existed in numbers that defied comprehension. The first escort carrier, USS Long Island, was commissioned in June 1941. By war's end, America had built over 70 escort carriers through various programs. These ships supported amphibious operations, provided anti-submarine coverage, transported aircraft, and even participated in surface battles. At the Battle of Samar in October 1944, escort carriers from Taffy 3 fought Japanese battleships and cruisers. their aircraft helping drive off a force that should have annihilated them. Lieutenant Commander Zenji Abe watched this battle from carrier Chitose, before his ship was destroyed by American aircraft. The sight of small American escort carriers standing against Japanese battleships while launching aircraft seemed to encapsulate everything wrong with Japanese naval strategy. They have so many carriers, they can afford to risk the smallest ones against our most powerful battleships. We conserve our few remaining carriers, hiding them from battle. They send their weakest carriers against our strongest ships and still prevail. The imbalance is total. Japanese attempts to build light carriers failed to match American production. The Hio class, converted from passenger ship hulls, produced only 2 ships completed after extensive delays. The Unryu class program, intended to create Japanese equivalents to the Essex class through simplified design and rapid construction, managed to complete only 3 of 17 planned carriers before war's end. Of those 3, 2 were sunk before they could conduct significant operations. The comparison was stark. America built over 100 carriers of all types during the war years. Japan completed 11 carriers from December 1941 through August 1945, and 8 of those 11 were sunk before making meaningful contributions to combat operations. Training and crew quality. The carrier disparity extended beyond numbers to the quality and training of crews. American carriers benefited from enormous training infrastructure that prepared crews thoroughly before deployment. The Naval Air Training Command expanded from 26 air stations in 1940 to hundreds of facilities by 1943. Over 60,000 pilots received their wings during the war years. This massive training establishment ensured that American carriers always had qualified pilots, crew, and maintenance personnel. Japanese naval aviation training, already strained by combat losses, collapsed under the weight of trying to man expanding carrier forces, with shrinking training capacity. The few carriers Japan managed to complete in 1944 and 1945 often sat pierside because insufficient trained pilots existed to fill their air groups. Carrier Katsuragi, completed in October 1944, conducted her first training operations in January 1945. She never conducted combat operations because qualified pilots could not be spared from defending the home islands. The quality gap extended to aircraft carriers themselves. Essex-class carriers incorporated lessons learned from 3 years of naval warfare. They possessed superior damage control systems, redundant systems for critical functions, advanced radar and communications equipment, and creature comforts that helped crew effectiveness on extended deployments. American carriers operated with elaborate maintenance facilities that could rebuild engines, repair airframes, and even manufacture spare parts while at sea. Japanese carriers, especially those completed late in the war, reflected material shortages and rushed construction. Unryu-class carriers lacked armor protection that earlier designs possessed. Their anti-aircraft armament was lighter than American standards. Most critically, damage control systems remained inferior to American counterparts, making Japanese carriers more vulnerable to catastrophic damage from single hits. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, who commanded forces during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, reflected after the war on the qualitative differences between American and Japanese carriers. Numbers alone did not defeat us, though numbers were overwhelming. American carriers were better designed, better equipped, manned by better trained crews, operating aircraft superior to our own, supported by industrial capacity that replaced losses overnight. We managed to sink American carriers in the first years of war. By 1944, they had become nearly unsinkable through improved design and experience crew training, while our own carriers remained vulnerable. Strategic paralysis. By October 1944, the strategic implications of American carrier superiority had paralyzed Japanese naval planning. The Shogo operation, Japan's plan to defend the Philippines, assumed American carrier forces numbering approximately 30 ships. When the actual count reached over 40 carriers in theater, with more operating throughout the Pacific, Japanese strategists realized conventional operations were hopeless. The Battle of Leyte Gulf saw Japan commit its remaining carrier force in a desperate deception operation. Vice Admiral Ozawa commanded the northern force built around carriers Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda. These 4 carriers, the last remnants of the force that struck Pearl Harbor 3 years earlier, carried only 116 aircraft combined due to pilot and aircraft shortages. Their mission was not to strike American forces, but to lure American carriers away from Leyte Gulf so Japanese battleships could attack the invasion fleet. The plan's desperation reflected Japan's position. The Kido Butai that once ruled Pacific waters had been reduced to bait, sacrificing themselves to create opportunities for surface forces. When American carrier aircraft from Admiral Halsey's Task Force 38 found Ozawa's carriers, the result was massacre. All 4 Japanese carriers were sunk by overwhelming numbers of American aircraft. Zuikaku, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor attack force, went down under multiple bomb and torpedo hits. Lieutenant Hideki Shingo, a Zero pilot who flew from Zuikaku during her final battle, described the hopelessness Japanese aviators felt facing American carrier groups. "I counted 9 American carriers on the horizon. 9 carriers attacking our 4 ships. Each American carrier launched more aircraft than our entire force possessed. Their fighters intercepted us at altitude. Their bombers attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. Their coordination was perfect. We were not fighting a battle, but executing a suicide mission without orders to do so. The Americans had so many carriers, they could afford to throw 9 of them at our pitiful remnant force while their other 30 carriers supported operations elsewhere." This numerical and qualitative superiority enabled American forces to operate with flexibility Japanese forces could never match. While Japanese carriers were concentrated in desperate battles, American carrier groups ranged freely across the Pacific, striking targets in the Philippines, bombing Japan itself, supporting amphibious operations in the Marianas, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa, and maintaining air superiority over every operational theater simultaneously. The final count. By August 1945, when Japan surrendered, the final carrier count revealed the total extent of American industrial dominance. The United States Navy had commissioned 99 carriers during the war years, 17 Essex-class fleet carriers, 9 Independence-class light carriers, and 73 escort carriers. Additional Essex-class carriers were completing or in advanced construction stages. Over 20 more escort carriers were under construction or planned. Japan's carrier force at surrender consisted of 4 operational carriers and 3 damaged or incomplete hulls. Of the 19 carriers Japan possessed at various points during the war, 15 had been sunk by American action. The 4 survivors were Hosho, an obsolete training carrier from 1922, Katsuragi, completed too late for operations, Junyo, heavily damaged and non-operational, and Ryuho, serving as aircraft transport rather than operational carrier. The mathematics told the story better than any tactical analysis could. America began the war with 7 carriers and ended with 99. Japan began with 10 and ended with 4 non-operational hulls. This 1,300% increase in American carrier strength versus 60% decrease in Japanese strength represented industrial warfare at its most asymmetric. Commander Toshikazu Ome, who served on the Naval General Staff and survived to become a naval historian, wrote extensively after the war about Japanese miscalculations regarding American industrial capacity. His analysis captured the essential error that doomed Japanese strategy from the war's beginning. We assumed American industrial capacity, while greater than our own, operated under similar constraints. We calculated that building a fleet carrier required 3 to 4 years. Therefore, we believed America might complete 15 to 20 carriers during a war lasting 4 to 5 years. This seemed manageable if we preserved our existing carrier force and completed our construction programs. We failed to understand that American industry did not operate under normal constraints. They created industrial systems specifically to mass-produce weapons at speeds impossible under traditional methods. They built 100 carriers because they redesigned shipbuilding itself to enable such production. We never conceived this was possible because we never attempted anything similar. Our failure was one of imagination, not just calculation. The human cost. Behind the statistics lay human tragedy on both sides. American carrier crews faced kamikaze attacks in 1944 and 1945 that killed thousands of sailors and damaged dozens of carriers. Japanese pilots, most with fewer than 100 hours of flight time, faced American carrier groups knowing survival was impossible. Young men on both sides paid the price for strategic decisions made by leaders who often did not fully understand what they had initiated. For Japanese naval aviators, however, the psychological burden was especially heavy. They had been told they were the world's finest carrier pilots, operating from history's most powerful carrier force. By 1944, they knew this was false. They flew obsolescent aircraft from vulnerable carriers against enemies who possessed overwhelming numerical and technological superiority. Their deaths accomplished nothing because American industrial capacity replaced every loss within days or weeks. Lieutenant Kiyoshi Ogawa, who would die during a kamikaze attack against USS Bunker Hill in May 1945, wrote a final letter to his family discovered after his death. His words captured the despair of young Japanese aviators confronting American carrier armadas. "Mother, I fly tomorrow against American carriers off Okinawa. Intelligence says there are 20, perhaps 30 enemy carriers in the area. I do not know if this is accurate, but I have seen the photographs. The ocean is covered with American ships to the horizon. I cannot count them all. We were told America was weak, that they had few carriers, that Japanese spirit would prevail. These were lies. The Americans have infinite carriers, infinite aircraft, infinite pilots. I go tomorrow not to achieve victory, but to die uselessly against an enemy we can never defeat. Please forgive me for participating in this foolish war." Ogawa's attack damaged Bunker Hill but did not sink her. American damage control teams saved the carrier. She returned to action after repairs. This pattern repeated throughout the last year of war. Japanese attacks occasionally damaged American carriers but rarely sank them, while every Japanese carrier lost was irreplaceable. Post-war reflections. In the years following Japan's surrender, surviving Japanese naval officers and historians struggled to understand how their calculations had been so catastrophically wrong. The carrier imbalance became a central example of Japanese strategic failure to appreciate American industrial capacity. Multiple factors contributed to this miscalculation, but most were rooted in cultural and 20T, organizational limitations that prevented Japanese planners from accurately assessing their opponent. Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who served as Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet in 1944 and 1945, submitted extensive testimony to American occupation authorities. His analysis included frank admission of strategic blindness regarding American production capacity. "We believed American society was soft, that democratic nations lacked resolve for total war, that their industrial capacity, while large, could not be efficiently mobilized. Every assumption was wrong. American society proved far more resilient than we anticipated. Their democratic system enabled industrial mobilization we could not match. Most critically, their industrial capacity was not merely large but virtually unlimited for purposes of naval warfare. They did not build 100 carriers because they needed 100 carriers. They built 100 carriers because they could. This reality was incomprehensible to Japanese planning." Mitsuo Fuchida, who led the Pearl Harbor attack and survived the war to become a Christian evangelist, wrote extensively about lessons learned from Japan's defeat. His reflections on American carrier production emphasized the spiritual and moral dimensions Japanese military culture had emphasized over practical material considerations. "We spoke constantly of fighting spirit, of Bushido, of Japanese warriors' superiority over Western materialism. These concepts were not wrong in themselves, but we allowed them to blind us to mathematical realities. When I circled over Pearl Harbor in December 1941, I felt supreme confidence in Japanese victory. I saw 7 empty carrier berths and felt satisfaction that we had missed them, knowing we would find and destroy them later. I never imagined that 3 years later, those 7 American carriers would have become 70, then 100. No amount of fighting spirit could overcome such disparity." We learned this lesson too late, paid for it with millions of lives, and lost everything we sought to gain. American naval aviation evolved throughout the war, improving aircraft, tactics, doctrine, and technology with each combat engagement. The carrier task force concept, perfected by admirals like Raymond Spruance and Mark Mitchell, enabled coordinated operations by multiple carrier groups that maximized American numerical advantages while maintaining flexibility to respond to Japanese countermoves. Japanese carrier doctrine, conversely, stagnated after Midway. With declining carrier numbers and increasing pilot shortages, Japanese forces became increasingly defensive, unable to project power as they had in 1942. The few offensive operations attempted, like the Ago operation at the Philippine Sea, resulted in catastrophic losses that could not be replaced. American losses in the same battles, often comparable in absolute numbers, were replaced within weeks. Japan could not match this regenerative capacity. The technological evolution of American carriers throughout the war included improved steam catapults that enabled heavier aircraft launches, better arresting gear that reduced landing accidents, enhanced radar systems providing earlier warning of threats, superior damage control systems incorporating lessons from every carrier damaged in combat, and improved anti-aircraft armament that made American carriers increasingly difficult to attack successfully. Japanese carriers showed minimal technological advancement. Late-war designs like the Unryu class represented simplified Essex-class equivalents, not innovations. Material shortages prevented incorporation of advanced systems, even when designs existed. Most critically, the doctrinal framework for carrier operations remained essentially unchanged from 1942, while American doctrine evolved continuously. The broader strategic failure, American carrier superiority, was both a cause and symptom of broader strategic failure in Japanese planning. The decision to attack Pearl Harbor rested on assumptions about American industrial capacity and national will that proved completely wrong. Japanese planners correctly identified carriers as key to Pacific naval warfare. They correctly calculated that destroying the American carrier force would provide Japan with decisive advantage. They catastrophically miscalculated American ability to regenerate carrier strength through industrial production. This miscalculation extended beyond carriers to every dimension of naval warfare. Japanese planners assumed a war of attrition would favor Japan because America would tire of casualties and seek peace. Instead, American industrial capacity ensured that material attrition favored the United States. Every ship Japan lost was essentially irreplaceable. Every ship America lost was replaced by 2 or 3 new vessels. By 1944, the United States was building escort carriers faster than Japan could sink them, and escort carriers represented the smallest, least capable class in the American inventory. The psychological impact on Japanese naval forces was devastating. Officers who began the war confidently predicting victory watched their navy shrink while American forces grew exponentially. The cognitive dissonance between propaganda claiming Japanese superiority and reality showing American dominance created widespread demoralization that no amount of exhortations about fighting spirit could overcome. By 1945, Japanese naval forces fought not to win, but to delay defeat, to die honorably, to inflict whatever pain they could on an enemy who would inevitably triumph. This psychology shaped the adoption of kamikaze tactics, the use of carriers as bait rather than striking forces, and the general desperation of Japanese naval operations in the war's final year. Conclusion: the arithmetic of defeat. The shock Japanese pilots experienced, discovering America had built 100 carriers when they expected fewer than 20, represented more than tactical surprise. It symbolized the complete failure of strategic calculation that doomed Japan from the war's beginning. Numbers alone do not tell the complete story, but in this case, they tell enough. 7 American carriers in December 1941, 99 in August 1945. This increase represented not merely quantitative growth but qualitative transformation of naval power that established American dominance for the remainder of the 20th century. For the Japanese pilots who survived the war, The memory of facing impossible numbers of American carriers remained traumatic. They had been told they were elite warriors, operating the finest carriers in the world. They discovered they were sacrifices sent against an industrial colossus that treated carriers as expendable products to be built in hundreds. The psychological impact shaped Japanese military thinking throughout the post-war period, creating profound skepticism about military adventures unsupported by adequate industrial capacity. The last words belong to those who witnessed this transformation firsthand. Commander Zenji Abe, who survived the war and became a professor of naval history, captured the essential lesson in his memoirs published in the 1970s. When we attacked Pearl Harbor, we believed 7 American carriers represented their full strength. When we surrendered at Leyte Gulf, we counted over 40 American carriers in one battle. By war's end, they had commissioned 99. This was not a miscalculation of 10 or 20%. Our error exceeded 500%. We underestimated American industrial capacity by more than an order of magnitude. No tactical brilliance, no fighting spirit, no sacrifice of our pilots could overcome such disparity. We learned the hardest lesson in military history. Industrial capacity determines victory in modern war. Japan possessed neither the industrial base nor the resources to challenge America. We should never have tried. The 100 American carriers proved this truth at the cost of millions of lives, most of them Japanese, sacrificed to our leaders' miscalculation and pride. May this lesson never be forgotten, never be repeated. The 100 American aircraft carriers that stunned Japanese pilots into disbelief were not merely ships, they were floating symbols of a system at war, a testament to what industrial democracy could achieve when fully mobilized. They showed that a free society, when challenged, could harness its factories, shipyards, universities, and human capital with a speed and scale that no authoritarian regime could match. They demonstrated that industrial capacity, powered by educated engineers, innovative designers, and adaptive commanders, would always outweigh even the fiercest warrior spirit when the numbers grew too large to ignore. For Japanese aviators who had trained under a warrior tradition glorifying personal sacrifice, battlefield valor, and individual skill, the sight of American carrier task forces seemingly infinite in number was not just militarily shocking, but philosophically devastating. Many of them later wrote in diaries and memoirs about the moment realization dawned. They were not simply fighting pilots, they were fighting a nation that had placed its entire industrial weight behind its war effort. They grasped that they faced something much larger than battleships and aircraft. They faced an economy that could replace losses faster than Japan could even count them. America's carriers were built not only by steel and labor, but by a system that encouraged problem-solving, fostered innovation, and rewarded efficiency. When parts failed, workers modified them. When tactics needed changing, commanders adapted. When more ships were needed, factories shifted overnight. This flexibility turned assembly lines into war-winning engines, proving that organized production could become as decisive as battlefield maneuvers. What stunned Japanese observers most was not just the quantity, but the rhythm of production. Carriers damaged one month were repaired the next. Aircraft lost in combat were replaced by brand new models rolling off assembly lines by the hundreds every week. The arithmetic became undeniable. While Japan could produce a handful of carriers in a year, America could launch dozens. While Japan relied on elite pilots trained for years, America trained thousands every month. Eventually, the war ceased to be a contest of skill and became a contest of capacity. The testimonies of Japanese survivors reveal a sobering respect for their American counterparts, not only for their courage, but for their ability to wage war as an industrial enterprise. They realized that modern warfare had evolved beyond heroism alone. No amount of bravery could sink 100 carriers when the enemy could simply build another 100 more. These armadas of steel did more than defeat a military, they shattered a strategic myth. They proved that modern wars are not won solely by soldiers on the front lines, but by workers in factories, engineers at drafting tables, and planners calculating tonnage, fuel, steel, and production schedules. War had become a matter of logistics, numbers, and relentless production. In the end, the arithmetic proved irresistible. Heroism could win moments. Industry could win wars. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.